Hey, well, welcome to this episode of Appalachian Shine. We're doing something a little bit different here at the Foundation for Appalachian Advancement today. We're going to be on ARC TV for this episode. And we've got Ernie Binko, the owner and operator of ARC TV. How you doing, Ernie? It's January 6th. It's cold and we've had a storm. How you holding up in Norton?
Yeah, I'm doing well, and we're got plenty of heat here for the time being, but we don't want to get outside.
Hey, well, for those watching, I hope everybody's staying warm. I hope everybody has power. And certainly, I don't know, we'll get over this cold snap eventually, I suppose. But till then, I guess we're stuck with some frigid temperatures for the next about 10 days, I guess. But Ernie, one of the things what we were going to talk about tonight for this episode and this podcast was something that's been a long-standing tradition here in Appalachia since the very founding and settlers hit this region. We're talking about moonshine.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about. You have a really interesting story about moonshine and whether, in fact, the famous mafioso had ran shine through this area back during Prohibition. Tell us a little bit about that really interesting story.
Well, let's say I'm a court reporter, and the fellow that was running the court system over in Dickinson County, we were talking 20 some years ago, and he said, Al Capone had a moonshine still between Virginia and Kentucky in this mountain here. That mountain has a whole lot of caves in it. So, and I said, well, I've never heard that before. He said, well, yeah, it's true. And I said, do you know where it is? He said, yeah. And I said, well, let's go over and videotape it. And he said, you can't. They're still using it. So that kind of shut that off. And I can tell you a couple of other things about the area. I was going to Union College in Barterville, Kentucky, and one of my degrees was in psychology, and they sent me out to a place called Stinking Creek
Yeah.
to talk to a family out there that they were having some problems with one of their kids' education. And so I went out and talked to them, and they found out that I was from Virginia, and they wanted to know if I could get any beer for them. I said, well, yeah, that's not a problem. I've got a friend of mine that has a nice place to eat, and they could get me all the beer I wanted. And said, well, let's go down and talk to Foley. He was like the godfather of the county. And you couldn't do a whole lot of anything in that particular county without talking to Foley. And like I said, he was like the godfather. So anyway, we went down and talked to Foley, and he gave us his permission to get beer and bring it back to the county. So back then I was getting Budweiser beer for 13.5 cents a can, and they were paying me 25 cents a can, and they were selling it for 2.50 a can. It was a dry county. And I was wondering where all this money went to. And after about 3 months, well, I had two pickup trucks. Only one of them was tagged, but you could split the tags, and you only needed one tag in Kentucky. So my roommate would drive one truck, and I'd drive another truck. Anyway, we were doing pretty good for extra money back then. And like I said, after about 3 months, I finally got enough gumption to find out where's all this money going to. He said, well, I get a fourth. The high sheriff gets a fourth. The bootlegger gets fourth. Okay, where's that other fourth going to? Well, you know where it goes to. I had no idea. After a while, he said, well, think about it. The preachers. The preachers get a cut too. And when you start looking around the county, they drove nice vehicles. They had new roofs on their house and they had paved driveways. So everybody in that culture was getting a slice. And that's where it was down there. And then another time after that, I was in a bunch in Norton that we made drag races and uh, fast car. And we'd go to Isom, Kentucky. And we were over there one day, and the sheriff came by. I want to know what we had in the cooler. I thought, oh God, we're going to jail for sure. And we had beer in there. So well, can you spare a six pack? That's no problem, no problem. By the time that was over, that season was over, we were hauling beer over there in coal trucks. And deputies were distributing it to the people that were there for the races. And apparently it was the same type of thing. Is the sheriff got some, the bootlegger got some, and the preachers got some.
For keeping it a dry county.
Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't until not too many years ago that Kentucky is one of the driest counties there was, or driest states there was
Yeah.
in the United States. Now, before that is, I think Knoxville was the largest community in the United States. You couldn't get liquor by the drink. So people would come up here and get truckloads or carloads, and you'd have one car drive in front, one in the middle, one in back. The one in the middle was hauling the bootleg or the beer or whatever, and the person would let the others know what was going on. The back one would do the same thing. So it was a whole test of how things were going.
It makes sense that Al Capone during the Prohibition era would have stills down in our region because, well, one, that's where it kind of originated from, but two, coming down from Chicago by rail, if you hit Johnson City, that was called Little Chicago back then. And of course, you could run those trains straight down into all the way down into Florida. I mean, so I guess Capone, Smokey and the Bandit had nothing on Capone for bootlegging and running booze across state lines. The interesting thing. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, US 23 that went right through here. That was the shortest distance between Chicago and Miami. That's one reason why they had it here.
Okay. Well,
and I lived in an apartment house over in Johnson City that was owned by Al Capone. That's kind of neat.
When you look back to the early, I guess why this is so uniquely Appalachian with Moonshine is that when you go back to the 18th century, when the settlers first came in, you had all the Scots Irish, right? And they brought with them these long traditions of distilling whiskey. And when they settled here, if you just look around these mountains, these rugged terrain, I mean, that's, the isolation of these mountains. Really, if it's going to be illegal like it was during Prohibition, this is the perfect place, isolated, if you're going to be clandestine about it. And back, the early part when they were making this stuff, farmers, they turned all that excess corn into whiskey. And, they did that to, well, not only one, preserve the crops, but they had whiskey to do trade and barter with, which was kind of a big deal back then. And really, I guess when the Whiskey Rebellion hit, and this is kind of going back into history, and I know you know all this, but that's, I guess, when the seeds were sown to make whiskey and moonshine illegal. Because and this was, I think, what, early 1790s. The new government, the U.S. government, they put a tax on whiskey, distilled whiskey. Well, we just had a revolution. We fought part of that revolution over a stupid 2-cent tax over tea. Yeah. So you can imagine how these farmers out here in Appalachia felt. Because, Appalachians are a little bit of a independent, rugged spirit in and of itself, and not necessarily going with the grain, obviously, right, so to speak. No pun intended. But, they depended on that whiskey for income. So they weren't going to pay the tax. In fact, they refused it. That's when you had that Whiskey Rebellion. And that at that point, they began to operate outside of the law. And to hide from the tax revenuers, they did their distilling at night by the light of the moon, and that's where you get that phrase moonshine. So
Yeah.
um, that was pretty cool just to get that. But a lot of people don't really, I guess, moonshine became, I guess, popular again when they started to legalize it, and then you'd see, because after a long decline because of legal issues and that cultural legacy, like started popping up again when people started taking history, having fun with it, and starting to look at those infamous bootleggers, and those shows that popped up on History Channel and Discovery Channel where they had all those people making whiskey. That for a while those shows became popular, and that's when people heard of people like Marvin Popcorn Sutton, they called him. But if you go back into the history of it, and I know you've talked about this before. If you look at a guy by the name of Robert Glenn Johnson, or AKA Junior Johnson, if you're a NASCAR fan,
Yeah.
that's where the beginnings of NASCAR came from, out of whiskey and ridge running to get away from the police. So that's some pretty fascinating history. It's so uniquely Appalachian. If it wasn't for the way this all played out, we wouldn't. Who knows how long it would take for NASCAR to form. But those stock car racing and Junior Johnson being associated with that and the history of that sport.
Yeah, I can tell you a story about that too. It was my sister married Ronald Collins, and his father was R.L. Collins. They owned Super Service Garage here in Norton. But when he was first starting mechanicking and all, he drove his streetcar down to Daytona Beach. He went down to see the first race at Daytona Beach. And he got down there and they said, well, why don't you go ahead and race while you're here? So he put his streetcar on out there and he raced in the first Daytona Beach race. But the reason he knew what to do is because he was fixing cars up for moonshine runners. And he did real well first, and then they were always into race cars, people racing, and we videotaped all sorts of stuff around here. But that's part of the heritage of that too. And I'll tell you another movie that I thought is pretty good is Robert Mitchum played in it, Thunder Road.
Yeah.
It was filmed over here, next county over. And I've been told by people that while I was in it, he stayed at the end while he was doing that movie. But anyway, it's I think that's a pretty neat movie.
Yeah, that is. Speaking of movies, there was one that came out in 2012. It was called Lawless, and it was kind of like a remake, an adaptation, modern day adaptation of a movie that came out, and I can't remember. It was a book, right? It was a book that came out. It's called The Wettest County in the World, and the guy who wrote it, I think he was probably an heir of these people. You ever heard of the Bondurant brothers of Franklin County, Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, as the story goes, so I was watching the Bondurant brothers. I think it was Forrest, Howard, and Jack. They had this extensive moonshine enterprise during Prohibition in Franklin County, Virginia. And I guess people started calling that the moonshine capital of the world, for those interested over there. But those guys were implicated and it's just like this huge bootlegging empire that was marked by violence, corruption, all these clashes with law enforcement. This was actually one of the biggest cases of moonshine and violence in Appalachia throughout the 20th century. And but anyway, these three brothers, they became legendary for their resilience, and I guess they survived assassination attempts and just constantly outmaneuvered the local authorities, kind of like, I don't know, Bo and Luke Duke, Duke's a hazard. It almost kind of strikes to that, but yeah, I guess it was one of their heirs, a guy by the name of Matt Bondurant, wrote a book called The Wettest County in the World, and that was based off of Franklin County, Virginia. And a lot of people don't know this, but well, maybe they do. Anybody that's familiar with the Hatfield McCoy feud, a big part of that feud had to do with moonshine. And and production, smuggling, and that was part of the tension between their two families as well. So this again another piece of Appalachian history and lore that involves moonshine and violence and criminal enterprises. It's pretty fascinating stuff. I wouldn't want to be in the middle of one of them if I could go
No,
back in time, but because surely you'd find yourself on the short end of that one. But the pretty fascinating history right here in these mountains.
no. Well, one of the things that people didn't seem to understand, the people from the area that were making moonshine, they weren't necessarily making it to make a lot of money. They're making it to have money to buy food with and stuff.
Yeah,
Is that it wasn't a whole lot of extra anything. There wasn't anything here to sell.
right. Unless
Besides,
you were a bigger moonshine enterprise, like with what you were talking about, with the kind of the corruption and the scandal, which was like the and we should probably do a podcast on this particular incident. But it's called the Battle of Athens over in Tennessee, and that was right after World War II. And that was a big story that caught up in the news because of um, these World War II vets come back to McMinn County, and anyway, they tried to challenge the local corruption that was tied to all the bootlegging activities because what had happened, I guess, the crimes that were listed in the Battle of Athens was that the political machines in the area often worked hand in hand with the moonshiners, like you were talking about, which is always the case. A lot of times is the case, but anyway, they provided bribes in exchange for protection, and it came to a head when the veterans staged an armed revolt against the corrupt officials. That sort of it all came to light and revealed the depth of the illegal networks in the area, and that was just over in Athens, Tennessee, in McMinn County. So that's kind of exactly what you were talking about with all the corruption and the and not have members of a church there trying to keep booze out of the county and keep it dry so you can get more money out of it. Criminal enterprises are. I mean, it's probably not hard to build one of those, but if it weren't for a few veterans coming back trying to challenge the corruption, who it probably would have went on until it became legal.
there's a lot of different stories. Here's something kind of interesting in our own area here. Is the Doc Taylor supposedly was hung for having the Mullins family, Dix's Mullins, killed over at Killing Rock. And they're bringing moonshine across the mountain from Kentucky.
Okay.
And they were shot and killed around um, Killing Rock. That's over a pound. And then they finally went after different people that they think were involved with that. But when you start really checking, is Doc Taylor was never hung. He was a Mason. This is a
Yeah.
story that the Mason, and there were seven Masons. I think it's seven Masons dressed in their suits and all that stuff, and they went into the box where he's supposed to be hung. And the trap door opened, something fell out, and then eight Masons in suits walked out. He's one of the eight that walked out. And then his family moved to Missouri, and he was with them when they moved. As far as I could tell, he was never hung. And
Wow.
I interviewed his great granddaughter, and that's pretty much the story that she told when I was interviewing.
Yeah, this is so many fascinating stories. And when you go back in the newspapers and you find all those stories from the mid part of the 20th century, and I mean, I think the latest one I found when it was like 1983. Um, it's it didn't stop then. It's just a lot of those stories never filtered out, just like what you described, like word of mouth and hearing it from other people, but no one ever wrote those stories down. And I
Yeah.
wonder how many other stories that are out there. But as far as looking back and maybe we'll do another show where we talk about a couple of these bigger stories in the newspaper, like of the Big Six firebombing in West Virginia back in the early '80s. You probably remember that too. Um, but these themes seem to run through every one of these cases that I read that came to light in the newspapers, where you had like a, crime and corruption and everything. It was corruption, violence was another theme, but the two things that, other than that, that stuck out was cultural identity, because a lot of Appalachians viewed moonshining as a means of survival, like what you said. A lot of people weren't getting rich from it; they had bills to pay, they had to eat, right? So one of the reasons they resisted federal laws that they considered oppressive is because they just had to get by. And the other thing was the economic impact, because during the times of bad economic hardship, moonshine was just a vital source of income for a lot of Appalachian families. And it's amazing how the families and the networks, the families never talked about it. You could go, like, you would never know what family was doing this, but families knew, and they kept secrets, and it's pretty amazing to learn that the legacy of these crimes is part of Appalachian folklore, and it just kind of reflects the region's struggles and resilience in the face of economic hardships and legal challenges over the years. Appalachians are a stubborn bunch, and the moonshine um, topic is certainly exhibit number one
Yeah.
to show that.
Yeah. Let me tell you another story. I think it's kind of interesting. I'm a technical expert in explosives. I worked for Gulf Oil, and they made more ammonium nitrate than anybody else in the world. And I was over in Buchanan County one day at Austin Powder, and we were talking about selling some ammonium nitrate to Austin Powder, and they're good friends and all that stuff. The alcohol, tobacco, and firearm people came in there, and they said, "We found a steel up here in the mountain, and we need to have some dynamite to blow it up. We're going to show these people." Like they
Yeah.
found something really big. So they sold them some dynamite, and they went off. About 2 hours later, they came back. Now, this is the ATF. Yeah. Wanting to know how to put it off. They're supposed to be the experts. Yeah. They didn't know what to do with the dynamite. So
Wow.
we had to, yeah. And then the same thing happened here in Norton, where there was a Hardee's here in Norton. And somebody found a couple sticks of dynamite laying in the bushes over there. Well, they made a big deal about it, and they called the Norton police, and they came up, said, "Yeah, it looks like dynamite. Well, what are y'all going to do?" "Well, we're going to call somebody." So they got somebody out of Roanoke to come down here and say, "That's dynamite. I'll take care of it." Yeah. Well, as what people forget with explosion, we got more experts on explosives than almost anywhere else in the nation, because the dynamite that we used in mines and mining
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So it shouldn't have been such a big deal.
Yeah, I
But
was about to say, should they just call somebody at a coal mine to come over and take a look at it?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I
um,
was going to do it, but they wanted the experts on their side. You
wow.
know,
That's a pretty interesting story. Now, Ernie,
yeah.
this is a fun topic, and we should definitely get together and do this again. Before we end tonight, what can we look forward to on ARC TV coming up?
Uh, well, we're trying to expand and get more people involved. We've got so much history in this area. And here's something else that we really need to showcase. 2026 is the 250th anniversary of the United States.
Hmm.
And we need to get the history, particularly the area. We've got so much history here, and hardly anybody knows about it. Even relatives don't know what their relatives did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. Daniel Boone lived here for a while, and his brother lived here. Uh, and they'd go hunting for like 6 months at a time. Uh, and there's so many other people that we could mention, and their relatives are still here.
yeah, that's a conversation I run into with obviously with the foundation, and one of our part of our mission is to promote our history and culture. That I run into this all the time that people are frustrated, especially people like the Gen X generation. I'm Gen Xer and frustrated because nobody teaches local history, state history, county history anymore. They leave it up to people to go out and look it up on their own. They don't build a curiosity in for young people, but we ought to know our history, where we stand, where we sleep. So
Well,
hopefully we can do more of these videos
let me
and
tell you
these
a couple
shows
other
to
things
do this.
while you're talking about. We got two of the oldest rivers in the world in our backyard here.
Yeah, New
The,
River and Clinch River.
yeah, the Clinch River is the third oldest river in the world. It's got over 100 different kind of fish in it. It goes right through our county.
I've lost more lures in that river. Let me tell you,
Do what?
I've lost more fishing lures in that river.
uh, and the other river just up the road here a little bit, the New River, that's the second oldest river in the world.
Great
And
fishing there too.
yeah, they're right beside each other almost. And of course, the oldest is the Nile. And we've got more different kind of vegetation here in the Central Appalachian Mountains than any place else in the world, including the Amazon River Basin.
Mm-hmm.
And you could look up all this stuff and talk. Hardly anybody knows this stuff, but it's information. Anybody can look it up.
Yeah, but it's something that I think need to be built back into maybe schools where kids can learn this stuff. Or yeah, I don't know how interactive libraries are with public schools anymore, or private schools, but if some of the public libraries had a local history section where they could highlight something maybe once a month, a guest speaker talking local history, it'd be a great idea. It'd be something for libraries to consider. And in fact, I think this week I'll reach out to a couple local libraries and suggest that. But let's continue to do this on a regular basis here, just with ARC TV highlighting something interesting
okay.
in our history.
Let me tell you one other thing. Now, I'll let you go. Is that the water that supplies the swamps in Florida comes from here?
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Well, as you got to remember, almost all of this is limestone. And the water from here goes through the limestone, ends up in Okefenokee Swamp and the others down there.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, you and I talked about that once before.
Yeah,
I was kind of baffled by that too, but that's true.
Yeah,
So
they put dye and radioactive dye in the water here, and it comes up down there.
wow.
So all sorts of things to check out and have people interested in.
Yeah.
Over at St. Paul, the Clinch River on the Russell County side, that's limestone. That's 400 million years old. On the Wise County side, right across the river, that's coal. 300 million years old. You lost 100 million years in that river. That doesn't even make sense. You throw a rock across it. But when you start checking it, that's part of the Appalachia Fault.
Yeah. That's fascinating stuff. Hey, well, Ernie, this has been, let's do this again soon. And thank everybody. I want to appreciate everybody watching this on ARC TV or on YouTube, wherever you share this video at, Ernie. And definitely check us out. Check out ARC. What's the website address for ARC TV?
Yeah, it's
ARC Television.
Yeah.
So look that up, and you can find the YouTube channel. If you want to find us online, we're at www.supportappalachia.org. One of the things we wanted to do is like just what we're talking about with preserving history is have smaller book. You know how when you go into a store and you see like the history of Abingdon or the history of Lebanon, and you get that book and it's just pictures.
Yeah.
History of Russell County. It's all just pictures, and it's nice. They're good to have those, but you don't really get a lot of stories about what happened, the founding of the town, the story of the town. Every town has its own unique history and story. And that's one thing that we wanted to be able to do, put together little booklets on towns and counties that tells your story. We have associations with Lost State Writers Guild, Appalachian Writers Guild. We have plenty of people who'd be willing to help out, but it takes money to do it. So we have to compensate people for their time. You can go to your local historical society's websites and buy a book that's not really comprehensive what you're looking for, and spend $50, $80 on it. But this is something we wanted to be able to have very inexpensive or free, depending on funding. But if you'd like to help us out in that effort, we'd love for that's part of our mission. So when you go to the website, $5-10 goes a long way. So if 50 people are seeing this and do $10, thank you very much. We
Yeah, and
certainly
if anybody has stories to tell about their ancestors,
tell us.
let us
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a quarterly newsletter that we do. We do a regular podcast called Appalachian Shine. So we'd love to share those stories. If you know of anybody, be a good guest, let us know. You can reach me at jc@supportappalachia.org is my email. And we certainly appreciate everybody watching on TV. We'll be back and talk about maybe some more moonshine, maybe some more of the natural history of the area. Um, like I said, every town has a unique history. Maybe we'll talk about Norton and how Norton got founded when it went independent, and a little bit of some interesting history of Norton. So, anyway, thanks everybody again. Tune in. Thanks, Ernie, for stopping by and doing this.
Oh,
Certainly
thank you. Glad
appreciate it.
to.
And
Okay.
we'll see everybody next time.